Hey y'all, welcome back. Before we dive in, there's a surprise clip that'll give DC fans chills, which brings us to one of the oldest debates in comic book history, DC versus Marvel. Now, I'll be honest with you. I'm not going to do a deep dive in here because if I did, we'd be here for days. This is more of a big picture look at what makes these two giants so different and why their stories hit the way they do, and why the studios keep screwing it up when they try to make live action movies. Because if you look at the TV shows and you look at the animated movies, they're always on point. And people always love to say DC is too dark. But let's be real, DC was never too dark. DC was too honest with the characters. These heroes weren't built on lucky accidents or one liners. They were forged in trauma, tragedy, and choices most people couldn't survive. That's why their stories feel heavy. That's why they carry weight. Marvel? Marvel's always been leaner and much lighter. Most of their heroes get powers by accident. A spider bite, a lab experiment, a piece of tech, and then they spend their stories figuring it out. And before the comic section lights up, yeah, I know there are exceptions like Captain America who made a choice and the X-Men who were born that way. There are exceptions for both sides. I'll touch on that later in the video, but overall, DC is more serious than Marvel. They were built on completely different parallels, on completely different DNA. And I think that's where people get it twisted, because when you really look at it, so many characters from both universes mirror each other in powers or abilities. But it's the themes underneath that set them apart. So let's step back for a second. Before we get into why DC feels heavy and Marvel feels light, we need to roll back the clock and look at where all this began. Superman didn't just appear out of nowhere in Action Comics #1 back in 1938. Before that, Siegel and Schuster had been trying to sell him as a newspaper comic strip, and every publisher shot them down. Nobody saw the vision. Then, the National Allied Publications, which would later become DC Comics, finally gave them a chance, and that's where everything changed. Action Comics #1 wasn't just the debut of Superman. It was the birth of superheroes in general. Period. No Superman, no Marvel, no Avengers, no Spider-Man, nothing. Superman set the standard. Then Batman followed in 1939. Not some lighthearted do-gooder, but a detective forged in noir, vengeance, and tragedy. A man who turned fear into a weapon. And then Wonder Woman in 1941 dropped it right into the middle of World War II. A warrior goddess, a symbol of truth, justice, and female empowerment before the culture even had words for it. DC laid the foundation. They built the archetypes. Marvel, they didn't even enter the game until the 1960s. That's over 20 years later. That's when Stan Lee gave us the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Iron Man, and the X-Men. And credit where credit's due, Stan gave Marvel its soul. He made those heroes flawed, funny, and human. And more than that, he gave Marvel consistency. For decades, Marvel had a single voice at the table steering the ship for Marvel. DC never had that. Their characters were created by different people over decades. That's why DC seems so different, because writers debate over what's right and the identity gets lost. Because they say, well, I see it this way, well, I see it this way, and then they never agree. And Marvel never had that problem because they had Stan Lee steering the ship. And let's be honest, neither company's heroes started out as the icons we know today. Superman couldn't even fly at first. Batman was running around in tights. And Wonder Woman, she was female empowerment before it was even a thing. And yeah, she needed an invisible jet just to keep up. These characters all evolved over time, and Marvel's heroes did the same. But the direction of the evolution, that's what really sets DC and Marvel apart. Because it's interesting when you realize this. DC has always leaned mythic or even supernatural, while Marvel has always leaned human. DC gives you gods walking among men. Marvel gives you everyday people with problems but godlike powers. When you look at these heroes evolved over the years, those philosophies shaped everything about how we view superheroes today. Take Superman, 1938. He couldn't fly, he could only leap a tall building in a single bound. That's why the tagline said faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. Bullets were the fastest thing people knew at the time. Locomotives were the strongest. And the Empire State Building was the tallest building in the world at the time. Superman wasn't born a god. He was built out of the imagination of what people thought impossible at that time. Later, Fleischer, if I'm saying his name right, cartoons gave him flight because it was easier to animate than constant jumping. Kryptonite came from the radio show because the voice actor needed a break to rest his voice. But those shortcuts stuck over time. Superman grew into a myth. And while Superman's growth was about refining powers and symbols, Batman's evolution might be the most dramatic of them all. In the beginning, he was just a pulp detective in tights with a cape, closer to Zorro than the Dark Knight. His Batmobile was basically a car with a bat painted on the hood. By the 60s, Adam West made him campy. Shark repellent, spray, goofy villains, and fight scenes with biff, bam, pow. Fun for its time, sure, but not the Batman we know now. That all changed in the late 80s with Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns and Tim Burton's 1989 film. Batman became gothic, terrifying, a symbol of fear. The 90s sealed it with Batman the Animated Series in this scene. Roll it.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.
I'm sorry. Maybe that's nostalgia talking, but that gave me chills. And that's when he became more than Bruce Wayne. He became a legend. Oh, and I have to include this clip as a tribute to Kevin Conroy, because Kevin Conroy was the man when it came to voicing Batman.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.
I love that line. I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman. That line has presence. It feels like Batman. And that's because of Kevin Conroy. He carried that voice for over 20 years through the Arkham games, Justice League Unlimited, Batman Beyond, and more. That's Batman as a legend. Okay, now back to the point. Nolan picked that up in Batman Begins. The idea that a man can be destroyed, but a symbol is incorruptible. That's Batman's real evolution. He grew from camp to nightmare, from man to myth. And that symbol grew beyond Bruce himself. Dick Grayson, Jason Todd, Barbara Gordon, Terry McGinnis. Batman doesn't just evolve, he multiplies. DC builds legacies, not just heroes. Marvel didn't take that path. Their heroes aren't mantles, they're people. And when you look at how Marvel's characters evolved, it's not about building symbols. It's about watching flawed individuals wrestle with power, responsibility, and all the baggage that comes with it. Take Captain America. He debuted in 1941, punching Hitler on the cover before America entered the war. He was propaganda, pure and simple. When the war ended, so did his relevance. He got shelved. But in the 60s, Marvel revived him frozen in ice and trapped in the modern world. That one change made him layered. He wasn't just American grit anymore. He was a man out of time, a hero built for yesterday, struggling in a broken today. And here's the difference. Cap isn't really a mantle. Sure, Bucky picked it up, Sam Wilson too, and others. But when people picture Captain America, they see Steve Rogers. Marvel didn't build him as a symbol to be passed on. They built him as a man, flawed, displaced, but still carrying the weight. And when Marvel's real breakthrough, Spider-Man in 1962, Now, let me say this up front. I love Spider-Man, but his story has always been different. Peter Parker wasn't a god or a billionaire or even a soldier. He was just a bullied kid from Queens who got bit by a radioactive spider. His lesson was simple: choices have consequences. And he learned that the hard way when he refuses to stop a robber after an event organizer refused to pay him properly, and it cost Uncle Ben his life. And he remembered Uncle Ben's phrase, with great power comes great responsibility. But here's the issue. Peter doesn't have boundaries. And I know people are going to get mad at me for saying that, but hear me out. He takes that lesson so far, he tries to carry the whole world on his shoulders. And in the process, he sabotages his own life. Missing work, showing up late, constant excuses. How is it that Miles Morales, who comes later, and others in this in the Spider family figure it out, but Peter never can? And this is where the contradiction comes in. Peter is supposed to be a genius. He builds his own web shooters, created the web fluid, upgraded his gear, even earned Norman Osborn's respect. So why doesn't he use that genius to create something that frees him up to be Spider-Man? Instead, Marvel keeps him stuck in the struggle. That's the tragedy of Spider-Man. Even when he saves the day, Peter Parker still loses. And then there's Iron Man. People love to compare him to Batman. There are similarities. Both are billionaires. Both are geniuses. Both build their own tech. Similarities end. Bruce Wayne saw his parents murdered and turned his entire life into preparation. He mastered criminology, psychology, mastered every form of martial arts in the world, mastered escape artistry, pushing his body and mind to the absolute limits. Batman built himself into a weapon long before the suit. His mission is choice and discipline. Tony Stark, on the other hand, didn't see his parents die. He grew up spoiled, arrogant. He was a womanizer, an alcoholic in some versions, building weapons and selling them to the government he thought were the good guys. Then reality hit. He was captured in a war zone, injured by his own tech, and built the Iron Man suit to survive. He didn't choose it. It was forced on him. And here's the big difference. Tony Stark is Iron Man. Everyone knows it. His identity is public because his ego won't allow anything else. But without the suit, he's just a man. Batman is the opposite. Bruce Wayne is the mask. Batman is the truth. Even without the gadgets, without the armor, he's still dangerous. He's still Batman. That's why the comparison falls apart. Batman is preparation and discipline, physical and mental discipline. Iron Man is circumstance and reaction. Batman built himself into a symbol. Tony Stark built himself a suit. Now, don't get me wrong. I like Marvel and DC. When I was a kid, I didn't know the difference. I just thought they were all superheroes. Both universes have great characters and legendary stories. The problem isn't that one is better than the other. They're just different. It's that the fans, studios, and even the culture keep forcing them into competition when really they thrive for different reasons. For example, let's look at the Man of Steel, for example. The film shows early on that Clark's journey isn't just about power. It's about character, restraint, and consequences. Let's start with the bullying scene in The Man of Steel. Clark gets pulled out of the truck, shoved down to the ground, and he grips a fence post with his hand so hard it bends. He almost crushes it under his grip. Later, he admits to Jonathan Kent, his dad, that he wanted to hit the kid. And Jonathan looks at him and tells him, yeah, part of me wanted you to. But then what? You have to decide what kind of man you're going to grow up to be, Clark. Good character or bad, that man is going to change the world. That was the lesson that people skip over. Who you are truly determines what you do. Then comes the bus rescue, which they show first in the movie. Clark saves his classmates from drowning because the bus goes off a bridge. But Pete's mom is terrified. And Jonathan goes outside and reminds Clark, we've talked about this. Clark fires back. What was I supposed to do? Just let them die? Jonathan pauses and says, maybe. Not because he wanted them to die, but because he knew the world wasn't ready to see what Clark could do. That's also when Jonathan reveals the truth to Clark about who he really is and what that means for his life. And then there's the tornado scene, which everybody condemns and everybody criticizes. It has more weight than most give it credit for. Jonathan chooses to sacrifice himself. Because if you pay close attention, when Clark goes to save him and he holds up his hand and shakes his head, he was signaling Clark not to act, to not save him, because he knew the second Clark stepped into the light, there'd be no going back and the world wasn't ready. And Perry from the Daily Planet echoes this to Lois when he says, what do you think people will do when they realize a man like this exists? So Clark chooses to obey his father and chooses restraint. And sadly, his father dies. Not because Clark was weak, but because Jonathan told him not to act because he understood the cost if he did. In just a few moments, Man of Steel lays out Clark's whole dilemma. What kind of man will you be? Do you use your powers when the world isn't ready? That's the heart of DC's tone, mythic, heavy, burdened with consequence. But Jonathan's voice wasn't the only one guiding Clark. Years later, in The Man of Steel, Jor-El gave him the other side, the vision that humanity could strive towards something greater, and the push when it mattered most, you could save them all. Then Zod arrives, and the lessons of both fathers are put to the test. The invasion leaves Metropolis in ruins, skyscrapers falling, thousands dead. Critics called it reckless destruction. But let's be honest, if two Kryptonians fought at full power in any city on Earth, the result would look the same. It wasn't sloppy writing. It was honest about what that level of power means. Because in Justice League Unlimited, in the very last episode, Superman looks at Darkseid and says, I feel like I live in a world made of cardboard, constant restraint, constantly being careful not to break something, to break someone, or someone could die. But you can handle it, can't you, big man? Let me show you what I can do. And he unleashes on Darkseid. So the Man of Steel was true to what Superman could do, but he chose not to, but Zod didn't give him a choice. Which brings me to in the end, and this is the other scene everybody criticizes, Zod forces Superman into a no-win scenario. Kill him or let innocent people die. Clark makes that choice and snaps Zod's neck and screams in anguish. He saves the world, but the cost is written in blood and rubble. Because Zod's heat vision was getting ready to kill an entire family, and Clark had two choices. Kill him or let them die. And either way, those were heavy consequences. That's why Superman matters. It isn't about flashy victories. It's about restraint, consequences, and impossible choices. And that scar, the fear, the mistrust, the destruction of Metropolis, is exactly what carries us into Batman vs. Superman, which, in my opinion, was a horrible movie. Because here's where everything went off the rails. DC didn't fail because it was dark. It failed because Warner Brothers panicked. And this is where Warner Brothers completely lost the thread. Instead of giving us a proper showdown, Batman vs. Superman, one full movie to explore their clash of ideals, which the animated movies, there are several of them where they go against each other. They tried to cram 4 movies into one. You had Batman vs. Superman, The Death of Superman, Lex Luthor's Rise, and even Wonder Woman's intro all stacked together. That's way too much story for a single film. Literally, when I watched it, I felt like they were jumping around so much, it confused the crap out of me for a minute. Marvel spent years building toward Avengers, letting every solo film drop a hint or a connection. DC could have done the same. Batman vs. Superman should have been its own movie. The Death of Superman should have had its own weight. Lex Luthor deserved his own film to cement as a threat and as a villain. And Wonder Woman's intro, that should have been her story, not a side cameo. Each of these films could have carried a small post-credit tease toward the Justice League or toward the next film like Marvel did. Marvel did that right. That way, by the time the League finally assembled, the foundation would have been solid. But WB didn't do that. They panicked, and the result was chaotic trash, in my opinion. Can you imagine how good those movies would have been if done correctly? We could have had spinoffs of Superboy, Steel, done right. It could have rivaled Marvel's buildup instead. Warner Brothers rushed it, and they burned their own house down. If you're wondering why I mentioned Superboy and Steel, it's because in the death of Superman, the most recent movie, they split it into two full-length movies, The Death of Superman, The Reign of the Superman, because they introduced Superboy, they introduced Steel, they introduced the Eradicator, and they introduced Android Superman. And the story was powerful. I've watched that movie at least 3 times. Both of them, actually, because I watch them back to back. But let's be fair. Marvel isn't bulletproof either. Honestly, I liked Marvel more when Stan Lee was alive. He was the glue. The cameos weren't just jokes. They were reminders of the heart behind it. Stan Lee wasn't just a face. He was Marvel's compass. Since his passing, Marvel's lost that anchor. Endless projects, forced humor, shallow villains. It's content for content's sake. The magic faded. The story started feeling like assembly line products instead of something inspired. And a lot of people are saying it's hero fatigue. I don't think it's hero fatigue. I love the hero movies when they were good. And here's the thing. That should have been DC's moment. Marvel stumbled. They dropped the ball. They left the door wide open. DC had a chance to rise, to double down on what made them great. But instead of stepping up, Warner Brothers panicked. They didn't trust their own identity and tried to copy Marvel's formula. And the effect was Marvel lost its compass, DC lost its nerve. And fans, we're the ones paying the price. So no, DC isn't too dark. It's mythic, symbolic. It's honest about pain, consequence, and hope. The only thing holding DC back is DC itself. Marvel had Stan Lee guiding their vision. DC never had that. Instead of trusting their identity, Warner Brothers keeps chasing Marvel's shadow. And that's why we're stuck. Marvel's lost its compass, DC's lost its nerve, and the fans, we're the ones paying the price with wasted potential, botched storylines, and endless reboots. But here's the thing. DC doesn't need Marvel, and Marvel doesn't need DC. They both work when they lean into what makes them unique. Marvel shines when it gives us flawed people rising above their baggage. DC shines when it embraces the mythic roots and builds symbols that inspire. The problem isn't the stories. The problem is the studios. So if you want better stories, stop defending the corporations and the people that are screwing this crap up and start demanding better. Because how is it that they get the TV shows right, they get the animated movies right, but they can't get the movies right? I'm legit asking because to me, it's ridiculous. Look at Smallville. Smallville ran for 10 years. Look at the Arrowverse. The Arrowverse ran, if you count all of them, they ran for about over 10 years, or right at 10 years. Because the Flash lasted 9 seasons, Arrow lasted 6, Supergirl lasted, I think, 4 or 5. And granted, Constantine only got 1 season, but he's been in every other show. He was even in Crisis on Infinite Earths. That's the point, is that they get it right in other places, but they screw it up in others. But I digress. I could go on all day. So before we wrap up, if you enjoyed this breakdown, take a second to like the video, drop a comment with your thoughts, what you truly think about DC versus Marvel, about their breakdowns, about how they're doing their movies and stuff, and subscribe to the channel if you want more if you like this content. It helps push the channel and keeps this community growing. And tell me in the comments, Team DC, Team Marvel, or are you like me and just frustrated with both sides because they could be so much better? Because at the end of the day, we don't need Marvel versus DC. We just need good stories. But that's all I've got for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.